Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Baer. I am board president of WIF Los Angeles, and it is my honor today to be hosting a Q&A with Sarah Bernstein, Jeannie Elfont-Esta, Lucy Arnaz-Luckenbill, and Amy Poehler for a conversation about the documentary Lucy and Desi, which has received count them, six Emmy nominations. Congratulations, everybody, and welcome. We're so happy to have you here. Congratulations, everybody. 6 nominations is the most for any documentary this season. How does that feel? How has the response been?
No one wants to answer.
I know, that's right. I'll say that it feels great. I mean, we all know in this business to work on something that is a pleasure and a really satisfying journey, and then to have it come out and then for people to respond to it, those don't always happen, all those things at the same time. And then for the Academy to hold it in high regard. So all those things happening is really exciting.
I know, it's so true, right? It's like every single leg of the race is such a marathon, right? So you get it made and then it's, will anybody pick it up? And then Amazon picks it up and then it's like, well, will anybody watch it? So it's such a triumph on every single level. So I'm going to start with you, Lucy, and I want this to be a real open conversation. As a member of the Ball Arnaz family and a subject of the documentary, how involved were you in crafting this narrative? You know, what was it like? I know there's been a lot of energy around your parents in recent years, but what was it like to sort of dive into this archival footage and start to craft the narrative of this documentary?
I didn't do it. I really just turned it over to some very wise people with their heart in the right place. That's all I can say.
Did you learn anything you hadn't known yet? Did you learn anything new in this go round that you hadn't known before, or any revelations or insights?
I always do. I've been learning things about them since I finished my own documentary in 1993. And, that was a cathartic, hard slog to try to walk that line. I know what it's like to not have it be just a tribute piece, and it's not Mommy Dearest. It's not a trash piece. You're not trying to dig up all the worms, and it's a hard slog. And I remember what it felt like when we were acknowledged with an Emmy, when we were acknowledged by the Academy, and that you did good, like you did it right and you moved people. At first I thought, well, geez, why are we making another documentary? I mean, it's been done, and I dug deep, but then I thought, it's been almost 30 years. I mean, I may not have all the answers. I don't know who wants to do this and why. And then I met with the producers and Jeannie Elfont-Esta and Nigel Sinclair, and they told me what they had in mind and how they were coming at it, and it was a class act. And then they mentioned they thought that they would get somebody like Amy Poehler to direct it. And I went, oh, wow. Okay. So it was just a whole other way of looking at the two of them. It wasn't a daughter's perspective per se, but because I'm in it and Amy asked me some amazing questions, and I've had 20 some years to think about my answers now. Yeah, I do look at things differently now. I have, my children are grown. I'm a grown up, and I've been through things that are very similar to what they went through. So I'm really glad that we had another chance to talk about it with fresh eyes, fresh ears. And then after opening up as many things as I could for them, scrapbooks and film and videos and archives and whatever I had, I said, come, look, take whatever you want, go where you want, take what you want. Then I just let it be. I just trusted this team, and they don't let you down. And it was nice that at the end, Amy said, we should run it by her. Run it by her before we let it out there, because we don't may have anything bad. And other than a couple of accuracies, like, oh, no, that guy's name was, or that actually happened on, or that can't come before that, I didn't really have anything. I can't take credit for any of what you see on that screen except what I said on it. Editing and the directing and the putting it together were these brilliant people.
Well, I love what you said about having a fresh perspective 26 years later. and having had life experience where you can relate to your parents in a different way than you did when you were younger and you were raising your children, et cetera. And I'm sure that had some, even though you weren't necessarily conscious of, oh, here's how I want the narrative to go, I'm sure it seeped into the work that our director and producers did when it came to crafting it.
Maybe there's a overview of life in general that I have differently now. I mean, I've tried to understand my own life and how people work and, how they function, how your brain functions. And maybe a little more spirituality is in my life now. Maybe a little more, hey, we're all here doing what we're supposed to be doing. And this was all our path and that kind of thing. So I look at what they did differently. I look at it differently and I feel for both of them. I mean, I don't have the old chip on my shoulder like I could have in the beginning, when I was growing up. And there's a lot of, well, I wish I had more of this, or I wish I'd gotten that. And then you don't look at it like that anymore. There's an enormous forgiveness and an understanding and a curiosity as to why people end up the way they do. And, go walk a mile in their shoes and see if it comes out any different for you, that kind of thing. Like, have the same choices at the same time in the road and see what you decide.
Right. That's really beautiful and very well put. And something you said is a perfect segue to one of the questions, Amy, I want to ask you. Lucy had said, oh, I wasn't sure there was anything new to say. And then 30 years later, you guys come along and say, we want to do this. And I'm sure that this, aside from obviously your aspirations as a director, which I want to get to in a second, I can't imagine that Lucille Ball didn't have some impact on you as a comedian. And I'd love to hear a little bit for you in the back of your head, if that was percolating both in your early comedy career and then as you started to approach this as a filmmaker.
Absolutely. Lucy and Desi were such incredible artists, and good art is something you can talk about over and over again and re-engage with and see different things all the time. So, I mean, I think there should be a documentary about Lucy and Desi every 30 years. You get to see different things, like we talked about, you to figure out your relationship to that art as you grow and change yourself. So the artistry, the skill, the incredible impact that the two of them had, I wasn't at all worried that we weren't going to be able to figure out how to engage with that. What I got really interested in, and just personally what I'm usually interested in, is kind of the humanness of humanity, the people behind the thing, the idea, the goals, the success, like that. I'm always very interested in the people behind that, because that's where I find my way into a lot of story. And so, yes, absolutely. Personally, much like a lot of people, American people growing up at a certain time, I Love Lucy was on when your parents were watching it. You discovered it as a young person. And then as a person working in comedy, I went back and looked at it in a completely different way. But here I am, a woman with children in an industry of a certain age, working towards things and looking at all of these things differently. And I think that was what was most exciting to me, was what is a relationship? The TV show was about rupture and repair, about human interactions. It's why people still watch it. It wasn't about big ideas, and it wasn't about high concept intellectual thinking. It was about heart. It was about emotion. It was about the feeling you have working life out with another person. Mm-hmm. And that's super relatable things that I think make great stories. So I definitely was deeply influenced by what Lucy and Desi managed to do in their lifetime here as creators. But as a director, I was much more drawn to the human relationship. What does a successful life look like? And, how can we revisit the idea of what gifts do people give us in relationship, and who is going to be with us until the end? All that kind of juicy stuff was really what I felt like was my way in.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, because one of the things, and I have literally seen every single episode. I watched it literally every day in my childhood. It was on For those of you who are watching this that grew up in Los Angeles, Channel 11 was KTTV at the time, and they had an hour of I Love Lucy and the Brady Bunch. And it was 5 days a week, and I watched it every single night. And it started when I was very young, and I just kept going, and I've seen them all. And I think, to your point, one of the reasons why the show is such a perennial is because it's completely relatable. There is nothing dated about it. There is nothing that feels, oh, well, that was a quaint, cute look at the 50s, right? It is so relatable on such a bigger existential, emotional, psychological level. And I think it's really, I love what you said about that as a filmmaker, that was your way into telling the story. Is it different for you? Did you feel like you had to exercise a different muscle as a documentarian versus a narrative filmmaker? Or did it feel sort of seamless for you?
Well, the process is, incredibly different. And I also, directed this, and we all worked on this during COVID, which was kind of wild. In an isolated time, in an isolated world. We were, also extra isolated, but it was a gift because not only were we allowed to be around discussions about love and family and relationship, but we were able to laugh, which was just huge. It's, I don't take for granted. And I think comedy in general is an art form that is often, it's like music, when it's done well, people feel like they can do it. And comedy was desperately needed during that time. And it was desperately needed when Lucy and Desi were doing it. And it just continually, Lucy and I were talking about this, that art keeps coming back when it's needed. And it was pretty wild to be watching, to your point, stuff that felt very relevant and very real about relationship during a time when we were all very disconnected. And so the process was completely different. The structure, the way that you approach the work, for sure. But I do feel and again, this is just my taste, I guess. And I think it's the women here too. I mean, I think you can tell any story if you find a way in. I'll go anywhere with any documentary, and as long as I feel like I've got some way in. And so in some ways it wasn't different. In some ways it was, what is the story I'm telling? How can I keep people engaged? How can I make this piece feel, and directing, so much of it is, what are you saying goodbye to? I mean, that was the hardest part of this job, for sure, that Robert Martinez, the great editor, and I had to just make these very, very hard choices about, because this could be a 10 series, easily, where we could focus on a million different places.
For sure. I felt that way, at the end of it. I was like, I could watch even more of this. And I joke about like, what would be like seasons 2 and 3 and 4. Like, I'm sure you could just go on and on and on.
We have it for sure.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, Jeannie, let me segue to you, because we read that you stumbled upon these videotapes and the audio tapes, and I would love to hear sort of how you came to all of that, and the sort of origin story of this, and how you and Sarah ended up teaming up. Tell us a little bit about that. Did you have an intention going into it? Did the discovery of these audio tapes change that intention? Give us a little bit of a sense of your process on this.
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, the whole story, this is a dream project. I mean, the first time I had lunch with Lucy, and before that, cold calling her manager, just trying to get some in, and not sound like I don't know, some frivolous phone call or something. Meet us for lunch. She doesn't really know who we are. So and our lunch ended up being like this 4-hour conversation talking about life and love and this incredible story. Going to Lucy's home in the middle of COVID, and you graciously opened up your home. It was like at a time where, remember, we didn't have any, and this is at the beginning. So we're not a vaccine. We've got, we're wearing gloves, we're wearing masks, and here we are walking to her home. And Lucy, as the keeper of all of the family's, things, like my brother's the keeper in our household. He knows where things are, but doesn't quite know exactly where they are. So like, okay, I put things here.
Sometimes I don't either.
Right. So I put things here and I put things there. I don't know where this is. You got to go through it. And we together, we went through this. And one afternoon, it was very hot in the desert where we were. I came into her pantry where she kept these boxes folded up, where I was putting them together to put, items in to be scanned, and look at more carefully. And I literally, you can't make this up. I just literally was stretching my back, and I looked up and I saw a lockbox, and I said, "There's a lockbox in your pantry." And you stepped up a ladder and pulled down the lockbox, and it was this lockbox that had Mom's precious taped which we photographed in the film. And on that was some reel-to-reel and some really cool audio of you as a child and Desi as a child, and Vivian Vance in the backyard. And this is after the divorce. Your dad's there, and you guys are reenacting your favorite I Love Lucy's, which was,
wow.
It still makes me cry and give me goosebumps on this really warm
That's
day.
season 2 for sure.
Yeah. It was just incredible. And then I always feel like, I said this before, but I always feel that when you find something of that magnitude, it's like the gods open up something. It's like a gold vein. If you're mining for gold, we then went into a guest room and pulled out this really pretty unusual box. And inside of that were these small DAT tapes of your dad's audiobook, which we, again, didn't know what it was because we didn't have anything to put. And I obviously didn't want to put a reel-to-reel in without having it handled correctly. And I didn't want to put a cassette in without handling it correctly. So, and putting it in the, you have to bake it. There's a process. So finding these jewels really helped propel the story, because it allowed Amy to decide if she could use this to tell the story through their own voices. It was magic. It was
that's really amazing.
That when I did my documentary and I wanted them to tell their stories, these tapes hadn't been found yet. And so I didn't have the ability to use any of that. For them to tell their stories, I had to buy footage from Johnny Carson, Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin, all of that stuff. And they existed, but I didn't know they were there until I found them years later and thought, what's this? And then we didn't know my mother had written an autobiography until years after she was dead. And those were the tapes that went with the autobiography, that how she wrote it with Betty Hannah Hoffman. And so now I could say, well, I have the transcript for this, but there's actually tapes that go with them. So that truly is a find. I was jealous as hell that you guys got that.
Well, thank goodness Jeannie stretched her back in your your pantry. It's possible.
Emergency food and Lucille Ball tapes. All
didn't we all have that? So Sarah, how did you get involved in this with Jeannie? Like at what stage was that collaboration sort of incubated?
Yeah. Well, I'm a co-head of Imagine Documentaries, which is the documentary division of Imagine Entertainment, which is Ron Howard, Brian Grazer's company. You had mentioned Happy Days earlier. I think, everyone knows Ron. That was
6 degrees.
Yes, it's
6 degrees of Happy Days.
Part of his formative life, but also a huge part of television history. And I think as we were we were launching this new division, as Ron had just released his Pavarotti documentary, which was a wonderful collaboration with Jeannie and Nigel Sinclair at Whitehorse. We were, really interested, along with Michael Rosenberg, who's our co-chairman, in trying to think, what is the next really big sort of iconic topic that we can tackle. And I think, Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, they kept coming back into this conversation. And I think everyone at Imagine was just so excited that we could potentially collaborate on a project if Lucy and her family would allow us to. And thank you for that, because you said you didn't do much on this film, but you really did. I mean, you opened the gate to all of us. So
a lot, Sarah, a lot of that
grateful
has
for
to,
that.
a lot of that, my doing that has to do with Ron and Imagine. You know, I didn't really know Nigel and Jeannie. I really had to trust them just from the luncheon. And you kind of think, you know, people, I'm a pretty good judge of character, I guess. But his history and Imagine's history, I just went, oh my God, he wants to take this on, then okay. I mean, that was just so great to know that somebody like your company wanted to have this. So that had a lot to do with my saying yes.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's true though. I mean, there aren't that many people that you want to make documentaries about. And I've been doing this for a long time. And you think about icons and you really want to think about what do they have to offer in their story that is so different. And I think you can't look at, you know, Lucy and Desi and not understand how trailblazing they were.
Absolutely.
So that's how we got involved. But, you know, for us too, it was really about who was going to direct this. And I think also from my experience, we absolutely wanted Amy. I mean, we wanted someone who could understand Lucy and Desi's experience, I think really firsthand, and bring something that was really outside of what, and, you know, and I love the documentary directors and I work with them all the time. So this isn't about not having a traditional documentary director on this, but I think there is an approach and a perspective that Amy had to the story and to the craft itself, to the art form of comedy. And as she said earlier, as a woman in this business, as a mother in this business, that would bring a whole different dimension to the narrative story. And also what I love is being able to let the jokes play in a way that I'm not sure just any director could do. So it was a dream project. And we were
I remember off the joke play, I remember Amy, you saying something to the effect, and you'll jump in to, you know, clarify it. But you mentioned that the comedy is like a musical score, and the way that you cut, and the way that Robert Martinez, our editor, and you cut the comedy into it was like a score, and it was really quite a unique and beautiful. Robert Martinez also edited our Bee Gees, How to Mend a Broken Heart, that Frank Marshall directed with us last year. That also got 6 Emmy nominations. But what's also really cool, and I think apropos for women in films, is, I mean, you know, our artists like Amy Poehler, who had has an extensive filmography, but directed, you know, Parks and Recs, which were in our home. That is what, you know, that my daughter would say that's attached to her TV set. She literally watches it before she goes to sleep at night. That is legit. And that makes her feel warm and comfortable and happy. And that's what Lucille Ball did. And Amy's extensive directing in her films. And then to have Amazon, you know, have this film and a studio run by Jen Salke. These two power women, Amy and Jen Salke, it's, you know, it's an unimaginable scale that is not, you know, that we have to like examine, because, you know, there's something like, it's only like 20, there's not a lot of women producers and women running studios. And I just feel like Lucille Ball's story was so important and essential to unpacking that dynamic of our industry. And how Lucy and Desi were outsiders of this system and who ended up at its forefront, right? Mm-hmm. You know, a Cuban man and this woman who managed this largest independent studio, it was groundbreaking.
Yeah, I love so much, Jeannie, what you were just talking about, because as I'm sure we've all had to deal with as women in this business, navigating personal and professional. There are so many firsts that I love the way the documentary addressed it, that feels so relevant, sadly, to today, right? 60 years after, 70 years after the show debuted, you know, being pregnant and demanding time off. And as a result of it, creating the rerun, you know, demanding that they would have ownership of the show, demanding that she wants her husband cast, who is Cuban American, and what that means, and all of these sort of utterly groundbreaking ideas about how to approach this show and their creativity. And I'm wondering, and I put this to all of you, if you have any better sense of what enabled each of them to kind of stand their ground, and and if anything, if you came away with it with any sort of new insight into how they were able to do that. Because if they had just been brilliant at creating a show, you would have still said they were brilliant. But all of the other information, and it was such a deeply passionate love affair, and obviously I wasn't living with them the way you were, Lucy, but even after their divorce, there was clearly connection there between the two of them. So I'm just wondering if any of you had sort of newfound understanding of how they were able to accomplish all that.
Who's going to go first?
I was talking a lot.
Well, while you were saying that, I was thinking about something specifically, and I said, you said demanding. They demanded this and they demanded that. The only way you can get demanding things get something by demanding it is if you know that it's the right thing, that it's true. It's not just ego stuff.
Right.
And they wanted to be together. That's the only way, their marriage was about to fall apart. And this was a great opportunity. If this didn't happen, all hell would have broken loose probably. So she was able to run out in front of the train, and she could be brave. Like she used to say, I'm not funny, I'm brave. She was brave. She threw her whole career in front of the train and said, no, this is what we have to do. Now we have to do this. They had an impetus behind them that allowed this to work. And not everybody can do that. Not everybody can just say, well, I demand that I be allowed to have my, you can see, right. I think people understood, no, she's freaking serious. They're dead serious. They're going to walk if, and it's not always that way. And, people always say, well, did she know what she was doing? Did they understand what they were creating? And I would say, no, I mean, it was like the ship is sinking and you got to grab the first lifeboat and learn how to bail. They just did what they had to do at the time to make it happen the way they needed to. And if you follow those steps that they followed, you'll see that they didn't come to it with like, I'm going to change television. They just, every step along the way, it was necessity is the cause of, what they invented. And that's what's fascinating to me.
I mean, talk about team building. Desi Arnaz is an example of what you do and how to build a team.
Yeah.
Sought out the best people, literally. He just went and he was a perpetual student. Both of them were perpetual students, and really, I can't build this. I can't do this in front of a live studio audience. Why not? I'll go to the building department and get the building. I mean, there's every single step of the way. This man said, "I'm going to do it." Anyway, oh, look, here's Carl Freund, the best cinematographer out there right now. He says we could do this and the lighting like this, and that lighting that methodology is still being used today. The 3 cameras, it's what's so funny is the laugh track, right? The laugh track is still used today, although, just to be clear,
it wasn't a laugh track,
in front of a live studio audience. That was it. They never used a laugh track, but their laughter, what became the laugh track, and that's what's so cool,
Yeah, and also, they were nice about it. They didn't insist in a nasty way, like when my father was. Like example you just said about, they won't bring the audiences in or something. Well, why not? And he would go and talk to the fire guy, and he would talk to the police, and he'd talk to the people on the street. Read his book. His book is unbelievable. A book, by the way. But it's amazing when you think about it. Even when the CBS said no, we don't think you can have a Cuban husband on television. He should have been outraged about being treated that way. Today it would be outrage. And he said, well, maybe, honey, maybe they're right. Maybe the public isn't going to accept us as a couple. Maybe the boys from CBS are right. why don't we go out and try it and see? Well, willing to fail, but to see, you know, and as opposed to getting his hair, you know, in a twit. So that's something we could learn.
Yeah, for sure.
Today,
sadly, we only have time for one more question because I could literally do this for another 2 hours. So I'm going to ask you, Amy, now that the documentary is out in the world, what's the one message or the one takeaway you hope that audiences and viewers are going to have after watching it? Is there something, is like your wish as a filmmaker and a creator that you hope that they take away this feeling, this idea, this inspiration? Is there something that speaks to you about that?
Ooh, that's a hard question to answer because I really hope people find their version of what they take away from it. Because I do think that there's a lot of stuff, hopefully, that speaks to a lot of people in the film. You know, it's the expectations of gender, it's the limitations of race during that time, and what we felt about people as a country. It was what was expected of women and men at that time. And I think also it was just a big, beautiful love story. I think there may be people that come in not that interested maybe in the material and the work, but the love story, and others that come in because they just want to see their comedy again. And they want to be reminded, like you were saying, Amy, of those times when they watched the show. So I don't think I would want to prescribe what I think the takeaway should be. But what the feedback that I think we've all been getting, which has been super satisfying, is that people have felt like they've seen a real, a story about real people behind these, what can often be two-dimensional depictions of fame and fortune and success. And I think that was by far our biggest intention was to bring these two people back to life, to make them flesh and blood, complicated human people, because we tend to put our heroes on pedestals and we really flatten them out and kind of forget the life that they lived and the challenges and the struggles that they had. And so that's the most satisfying feedback, is that people saw the people there, because I think that's the only way really that we can connect is, you know, in this world of big ideas and concepts. I still think at the end of the day, we as people need people and want to see people, and we want to understand them and understand ourselves. But as far as the message, whatever you like, babe, whatever floats your boat, honey.
Well, everything you just said, I think, is exquisite and accurate and authentic. And it's a great way to end this conversation. So I want to thank again, Sarah Bernstein, Jeannie Alfesta, Lucy Arnaz Luckenbill, and Amy Poehler. Congratulations on Lucy and Desi. It's on Amazon right now, streaming, and best of luck with the Emmys. I'll be crossing fingers and toes.